Dark Souls is an action RPG developed by From Software. In this video I will go through the whole game, covering most enemies, all bosses, and will place criticism where appropriate. I wanted to make this video for two reasons. First, I really like the Souls games, but I think many people have some misinterpretation about its design. It kicked off a whole genre of games and it has historical importance for gaming. Secondly, I want this video as a foundation for future videos. Human evaluation only works with comparisons, and with this I hopefully can reference its combat. We start by making our character. This is Meaty. I'm not sure if he can see shit, but he is the most beefiest boy ever made. He's perfect, 10 out of 10 human sausage. I pick Knight as a class and Master Key as a trinket. In fantasy games, I usually go with something magic related. I never understood this. You get these fantasy worlds with dragons, flight, elves and all that stuff, and then you decide to not use magic. Meaty, what do you want to be?
I want to poke with pointy stick.
But you could do anything: spitting fire, transform yourself, make yourself invisible, shoot magic missiles and more.
I want to poke with pointy stick.
Okay. I use Knight in Dark Souls for two reasons. First, it seems to be what most people pick. Secondly, melee fighting is sort of the base in Dark Souls. When you run out of arrows or magic, you will always resort to melee. And most of the time, no matter which class you have, you will fight with a melee weapon because you cannot use magic or range all the time. For magic you need either fight the enemies before the boss with melee weapons and then have enough charges for the boss, or fight everything else with magic and then use melee weapons for the boss. I choose Master Key very simply because it's the most expensive trinket if you buy it. I will go the intended way for this analysis. I will not do skipping or use alternate paths.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity, heat and cold.
The story does not really matter. It's there for atmosphere, not tension or intrigue, which does not mean that the atmosphere it provides is not important. We start in the asylum, naked and hollow, and go to our first bonfire. Bonfires are our respawn point. Later it also functions as the place to level up, repair, upgrade, attune magic and teleport. Then we meet the first boss, before we encounter the first enemy, the Asylum Demon. I forgot that you fat roll with your starting equipment, which I then unequip. If your weight is about 50%, you fat roll, which is the slowest dodge. Then above 25%, normal roll, and under 25 you are very fast. Those three different dodge rolls have different animation times, iframes and recovery. You can actually fight him, well, maybe not fat rolling, but what the game expects you to do is going through the gate to the left. There we will find an enemy that shoots very slow arrows at us, and find our shield, which helps us getting to the enemy without dodging. We also get our weapon and, most important, from Oscar our Estus Flask, which is a refillable healing item. We also see the first trap in form of this rolling ball that I always remember the first time and forget the second time. We go through a white light, which I swear I remember as a fog gate, but this wasn't correct. And we see the boss below us, and can do a dive attack. This high elevation attack is never expected from you, although you can do it at some points in the game. The Asylum Demon is not a hard fight. Its attacks are very well telegraphed and you can block most of it or dodge it. Most players will automatically try to fight it from behind. Seeking the ass is for most larger enemies the better strategy. It also fits thematically because we are in a prison. With the Asylum Demon beaten, we move to Lordran, aka the Firelink Shrine. We can now level up, and my first goal is wearing my armor with fast roll, which means endurance. But first I need to talk about our combat options. You can categorize combat in three ways: offense, defense and healing. You can attack fast or slow. You have a jump attack, a different attack after sprinting, and a kick to break shields. This movement changes with the weapon type, or if you decide to hold a weapon two-handed or one-handed. For defense you can block, dodge, evade, with that I mean just walking outside the area, and parry. Parry also serves as offense that lets you do extreme damage. You can also backstab enemies for the same. Circle Strife is a good beginner tactic for tougher enemies, which means holding block and moving till you are in the back of the enemy, and then press fast attack for a backstab. You have these combat options from start to finish, and all cost stamina as a resource that regenerates fast or slow when you are in a block stance. Now back to Lordran. From this point on we can go multiple routes. New Londo, Undead Burg and the Graveyard. Only Undead Burg is intended, and when I first played Dark Souls I didn't see the ramp and was stuck at the Graveyard for more than an hour. We now have hollow enemies that are a bit better equipped and faster. You can block and parry most attacks, but we can already see is formations. I don't mean Age of Empire like formations, but more like the enemy setup. We have melee fighters that should keep us occupied and range fighters in the back that attack us as well. This introduces tactic, which doesn't mean how we fight but how we approach a fight. For instance, we could ignore the melee fighters and first kill the bomb throwing guy in the back. We could also lure them down one by one or just fight while dodging the bombs. We easily kill them and enter a small passage with a passive red. The intent here was probably to showcase that you cannot fight well in tight spaces. Your weapon bounces off the walls. You can however use a weapon two-handed, which reduces the off bounces heavily, which is something not explicitly taught to the player. After this we pass another white light. I like that those are placed in non-boss areas, so on your first time playing you will always wonder if that's a boss or not. We see the red dragon introducing the area, where we can again see another enemy formation, of both ranged attackers and melee fighters. And then our next bonfire. Bonfires can be kindled by offering humanity while being human, which you can get by consuming the item with the same name. That process increases your maximum Estus flask on this bonfire by 5 to a maximum of 20 after killing Pinwheel. Going a bit back we find our first shielded enemies. Those use a shield, and if you use one-handed normal attacks you will do almost no damage. You can kick the shield down or better, use your weapon two-handed, which will stagger the enemy, allowing you to kill it. Alternatively you can circle strife it and give him the old backstab, which usually takes longer. We also meet the first merchant that at this point does not really sell anything worthwhile, besides a key that you will need for later. Going forward we have a small bridge with bomb-throwing hollows above it. After the bridge a room with 3 hollows. You could lure them out, but you can also defeat them in the room. The former is easier but takes longer. On the next part we get introduced to another tactical approach. Below us are normal enemies, but above us is a crossbow-wielding enemy that will shoot you in the back. First going off your way to kill the crossbowman and then the hollows below it is the approach best taken. The Black Knight, that is also not on the main path, is one of the first demi-bosses you can encounter. Like demigods are not proper gods but powerful, demi-bosses are exceptionally powerful for the area they are in, and they also rarely respawn. With backstepping and blocking or with parrying, he's a pushover, but for many new to Souls games, he's a tough nut to crack. You can make this harder for you by fighting him where he stands. It's easier to lure him in an open area and fight him there. Back to the right path we see another hollow standing above us. This is a trap. And he will kick down a burning barrel at you. When I played Dark Souls the first time, I actually did see that he's standing behind something, but even on PC you cannot clearly identify the object as a barrel, and even if you do, how would you know that he will kick it down at you? I ran straight into it at that time, naturally. If you could see that this is a barrel, and that it will come down at you, then I would view it more favorable. I would even think it's really good, but in this case it feels like a cheap gimmick because the lack of visual or auditive indicators makes this non-predictable, and as a result you cannot react to it. This is far from the worst. Before we come to the Taurus demon, the next boss, we can go to an alternative route to Havel, one of the aforementioned demi-bosses. At this point in the game you should not be able to kill him, and every hit he does is fatal. You can kill him and get a pretty good ring as a reward. Now back to the boss. The Taurus demon is a boss with a gimmick. When I first played Dark Souls I got shredded by him because I did not recognize the crossbowman behind me on the tower. That will give artillery support to the boss. Most people will then climb up the stairs and kill the snipers. The tower can also function as a good arena for the boss, as you have little space on the wall. I wanted to show you why it's a bad idea to fight him that way, because he can throw you off the wall when you block. But I accidentally killed him, sorry. You can block most of his attacks, but dodging is only viable on the tower. The Taurus Demon is actually harder if you played Dark Souls 2 or 3 before, because in Dark Souls you can only dodge in 4 directions. And if you played the other parts and think you can roll diagonal behind the demon, you will most likely roll into him and get smacked. We now come to the worst part in terms of ambush design. If you go over this bridge, a dragon appears that will kill you if you don't know about it already. There is little to no indicators for this happening, not a single one that is decisive. Also, even if you know that the dragon is attacking, doesn't mean that you know what to do. This sort of prolonged elemental damage is for new players an unknown factor. There are only 2 excuses. If you wanted to communicate with the player that you are not safe after a boss, and if you want to make the dragon appear menacingly. You will travel over the bridge, and because you know how devastating the fire is, you will probably run towards the stairs, revealing a shortcut to a prior bonfire. Most people really gush over this interconnected level design, so much that whenever From Software releases a new game, they complain about the lack of it. For me, this shortcut was neat, but not this life-changing game experience that will forever change gaming and history that many people make it to be. But let's talk about enemies. In the Undead Asylum as well as in New Londo, you will meet enemies that are passive or neutral, weak and unrewarding. I want to call these enemies atmospheric. Those enemies are not part of the combat experience, but are solely there to provide proper atmosphere for the theme of the region. They are neither meant nor designed to be fought. And now a question. If you have enemies that are very weak and passive, enemies you don't fight by design, can there be also the opposite? Enemies that are very strong and aggressive, but also not meant to be fought? I think the answer is yes, and that's the case for this dragon. I have some arguments for that. First, you don't have to fight him. You can lure him down and then run towards the gate. You can also go under the bridge. He is not a boss and does not provide that much of a reward in regards how strong he is. Also, you were introduced to his fire in a way that should make it so you don't want to fight him. And lastly, fighting him is awful. His physical attacks are fine, but sometimes he just randomly decides to either jump back, then hits you frontal with fire, or he jumps upwards and gives you hunts from the sky. You cannot dodge this fire, and the only hope you have is standing behind a pillar, which not always work, or block. But blocking does not work either, because at this point most players don't have a good shield against fire. If that dragon is meant to be beaten at this stage, it's one of the worst enemies. But if Dark Souls took a more adventurous Zelda-like approach, then this demi-boss is fine. I bring up Zelda because Dark Souls took clearly inspiration from it. Most obvious the lock-on system, but also dodging and blocking. Most people think that Dark Souls should be beatable with any weapon and at appropriate difficulty. But I think that only applies to bosses, and many occurrences during exploration are meant to be done with different equipment. In Zelda you cannot use the sword and never use bombs or the bow. You need to use most of it, if not all your equipment, and likewise this approach was taken to some of Dark Souls sections. For another example, there is an undead dragon in the valley. You can run past it and take the items. But if you try to fight it with melee weapons, you will have a bad time. His attacks are not only strong, but also very fast. There isn't even time for hitting back. I think this enemy was also an atmospheric enemy, but From Software's design philosophy was to make everything killable. NPCs, firekeepers and all enemies. So you need to use a bow, but I kind of screwed up, and the bow takes ages. It would have been better with a trick, for example shooting a larger rock that kills the dragon, or make him really weak against arrows. But as I said, you are not supposed to fight him. He doesn't safeguard an area, you can pass him or even ignore the area, and he doesn't give good items or that many souls. Souls is by the way the all-around currency, I should have said that earlier. Back to the bridge. We pass it by running under the dragon and open the gate. We can now go up and fight another Black Knight, or move onwards. This is now one of the, maybe even the best formation in the game. You see a giant boar, you don't know that enemy yet, but it might scare you, and 2 archers on the archway above. You will most likely notice the staircase to the right. Because you were already trained for this, you will first go up the stairs and kill the archers. You then find an alluring skull that can attract enemies, and below you is a large unknown enemy. This will lead you to using the skull on the nearby fire, which can kill the boar. You can also probe it for prostate cancer. The design in this place is stellar as it incorporates previous lessons learned and you can recognize it. Then you will be tested on it and will be expanded with the skulls. We come to another new enemy. Balder Knights are fast in their attacks and can parry. They use their equipment more flexible than the Hollow Knights from before, but they are beaten just the same. Parry, blocking, backstabbing or rushing them down two-handed are all viable. We go beside the church to another bonfire and Andre, the first smith. He can upgrade our weapons. For this playthrough I purposefully tried to play as intended, which means I don't skip content to make myself weaker, but I also don't farm and make myself stronger. For upgrading I do the same, I use whatever I have on hand. You can also buy from him, which is probably intended, they included it in the game, so I only bought shards whenever I had leftover souls after leveling up. We also meet a weaker demi-boss in form of this knight. He has very strong attacks and you can parry all of them, although one is more difficult than the others. He cannot be backstabbed, which should give most new players trouble. We also get our next shortcut to the Firelink Shrine. Below Andre is a large demon that has a lot of range and a lightning attack. This demon demi-boss has a jump attack. It goes really high, and because the true endgame boss of Dark Souls is the camera, I really hate jump attacks. You easily lose orientation and dodging suddenly doesn't really work because you can't see where you dodge. You can also unlock the camera, which helps against many bosses, but the jump attack is so quick that unlocking the camera for this brief instance is almost not possible, and fighting it without locking on will make blocking way harder. If you sniff his armpit the whole time, the demon is very easy. We need to go to the roof of the church, and on the way we meet a caster that is very easy in closed combat. On the roof we meet the gargoyle, for many probably the first enemy which tail you can cut off to obtain a weapon. At around half health another gargoyle joins the fight. Usually one gargoyle is breathing fire, while the other is attacking in melee, which makes this a better 2 versus 1 fight than others. Blocking and dodging works. After this we ring the bell, which was the goal. Behind where the demon was, we go to another area, the Darkroot Garden. Fittingly, there are also some plant monsters. There's a hidden bonfire behind a fake wall. Those walls can be revealed by hitting them. With a very expensive seal you can get from the blacksmith, you can open a door right next to it. But this area is for later. We go down and find another atmospheric enemy, in form of these trees. There are also some weird snakes, exactly 2. And I see them more as living traps, instead of real enemies. Lying on the ground are stone giants that are, forgive the pun, not really hard. The last normal enemy is this weird plant lizard. That is not a challenge, but looks fitting for the area. Before we go to the boss, let's talk about this area. I'm not 100% sure what this effect that makes everything blurry is called. Some say it's motion blur, although I always thought that this requires, motion. Let's call it what it is. Shit. It hurts my eyes, it looks awful. I bet it was included for technical limitations, but they should have just used fog or something. The boss of this area is the Moonlight Butterfly. If you decide to only use closed combat, then this will be probably one of the worst bosses for you. For the purpose of this video I only used swords, and it took a lot of waiting time, sometimes healing, till you beat it. It has fast attacks that you cannot reliably dodge, but you need to block, slower attacks that you absolutely need to dodge, and the same is true for a beam attack. Sometimes it will come down, gives you time to attack, then explodes. And the circle happens again. I suspect heavily that this boss was designed to be fought with ranged weapons, or magic. Which again leads me to thinking that Dark Souls 1 was developed to be more like Zelda. After this you get an Ember. Embers lets you upgrade weapons or modify them. Now off to the sewers. We access it by the start of the bridge, where the dragon attacked. We go down and immediately get a shortcut, which makes me wonder why not having the shortcut gate function as the access. The original entrance is pointless. The first new enemies are hounds or dogs. They attack fast and dodge sometimes. They are pretty aggressive, but can you blame them? Just look at our boy Meaty. Just rush them down or block. When we go up, we free another NPC with the key we got earlier from the merchant. And further up, we see another alteration of the Hollows, with torches this time. They do a surprising amount of damage. The biggest danger is probably that you might underestimate them. Further down, we get ambushed. With that I mean that the doors open and after a while those thieves come at you. If you play with caution, you might already gone a bit back after you heard the door opening. Then you attack and kill them, mostly like other humanoid enemies. The only thing you might need to look out for is when they are about to parry, which is indicated by them having a specific stance. Next you will see the same with more enemies and dogs together. Those ambushes are pretty much fine. First of all, they only work the first time, and they are only 5 enemies away from the last bonfire. 3 of those are old enemies you already know how to beat. Those are also not sure kill ambushes, because they happen before you move into a corner. You can retreat with all of them. Next we fight the Capra Demon. When I first played Dark Souls, I beat him the first time, but that was more due to luck than skill. The Capra Demon has 2 dogs and a very tight boss arena. Many players, me included, will dodge towards the stairs and kill the dogs on it, or on the archway besides it. Many people claim that this boss is fine because they can beat it every time. If that argument is valid, then I say I can also beat it every time, but I don't think the boss is fine. It feels more like a trap or a gotcha moment in form of a boss. The problem I have with this boss is threefold. First, it comes after a lot of combat, which means that new players are already damaged and don't expect the boss right away, because in terms of space they are only just entered the area. Secondly, the camera is not really made for these types of encounters, and they also placed a tree in tight spaces that also obstructs your view. And third, this boss not only tests you on a new concept, but on 2. A boss with minions and a boss in tight space. All this together is way too overwhelming for new players. I get that this boss is there to reduce panic, but this is overkill. The Capra Demon by itself is pretty easy. You can block all of its attacks and it has enough time between those for you to strike back. Dodging is of course also viable. I'm not sure about parrying. I tried a bit, but it didn't work. It didn't work so much that the Capra Demon's attack didn't do any damage. Forgive me for the pun, but fighting in tight spaces makes dodging a bad move. So most of the time you have to rely on your shield. Further down we can go up again to open another shortcut, this time to the Firelink Shrine and a new trader. Then down again we come to the sewers or depths. First you get a horde of hollows, some with torches, and then dogs together with a new enemy, the Butcher. I suggest not trying to parry or block all attacks, because the hook on his left hand will grab and hit you through a block. You can backstab him. There's also an ambush prepared for you, which you can trigger early by hitting him with a ranged attack. Those butchers don't respawn but are hungry for
fresh meat, tea.
You can also free another NPC by dodging. If you hit the barrels, chances are high that you can hit the NPC, which in return will attack you. There are also some boxes behind the butcher, and right behind those, a shaft that will let you fall down. You can roll into it naturally and arrive above a giant rat. That should be probably categorized as a demi-boss. It is very weak despite how it looks. Alternatively, you can equip a ranged weapon and hit it from above. I highly advise to go into the sewers while being human. You will meet a lot of rats while exploring, and they are a good source for humanity and are fought just like dogs. There are also slimes that ambush you from above. The first time you get lured in by an item, and even me knowing that the slime is on the ceiling, I could not see it, which makes this ambush really unfair. Slimes have some attacks, but they get staggered, so just equip your weapon two-handed, attack them, and then retreat till your stamina regenerated. You will also get invaded if you are human, by an NPC named Kirk. Those NPC invasions are pretty fun and give you some loot. They have your moveset and can put up a challenge, but the AI is weak, so you can get easy backstabs or parries. Further down we meet a sole non-respawning caster. And then Basilisk. That don't really look that way, more like mutant frogsters on drugs. Those monsters spew some sort of gas that will kill you instantly if the bar fills completely, and curses you, which cuts your health by half. and takes a lot of souls to heal it. It can actually halve it again if you go down, which means you are stuck with only 25% of health. The curse buildup will be much weaker if you are human, and I'm not sure about those enemies. When I played it the first time, I got cursed and had a pretty rough time after this. On the other hand, I never got cursed again after that, and the experience is still engraved in my memory. Permanently punishing the player is something we see returning in the Souls series, but much weaker and better implemented. For new players, this is very traumatizing. For a better solution, give the player free curse lifting stones to introduce the player softly into this mechanic. For me, that would practically solve the issue. On the exploring side, I don't like instances that requires you to jump over shafts. Jumping is handled poorly in Dark Souls 1. The controls feel like choking a donkey with 2 broken hands, and the execution is as inconsistent as my microphone quality. I also dislike rats jumping out of crates. Those are not unfair in any way, but the rats are physically bigger than the crates and it looks off-putting. We get a bonfire and a shortcut to said bonfire in this area, and the boss is Scaping Dragon. That is so easy that I don't feel the need to talk about it. I'm just noting that you can cut off its tail. I'm not sure, but I suspect this boss to be another atmospheric enemy. More in it for the lore and theme than for its value in combat. We get access to Blighttown, which is the opposite from a fan favorite. Blighttown has multiple issues, but first you get introduced by a new enemy. The infested barbarian inflicts poison and has a long range. You can backstab them easily, but they have a large health pool. Blocking works, but takes a lot of stamina. Further in we find infested ghouls that have a crab attack, so you can't block mindlessly. And also blow dart shooting enemies that don't respawn, but inflict toxic. Toxic drains your health extremely fast and can only be healed by using a blossoming purple moss. They get usually down in one hit, but their placement makes it hard to get to them. The intent here was probably to get toxified, and then you have to deal with constant health loss while exploring and killing them on the way. I want to note at this point that you can enter Blighttown from a different direction, which will make those enemies a joke because they were not designed to work from that way. You also meet Hellions, which are dogs that spit fire, and the probably worst jump in the game, which kills me more often than most bosses. There's also another atmospheric enemy that you can kill. I have no idea what that thing is doing here. We go down to the base of Blighttown and find 2 new enemies. First, some fire-spitting bug that you can rush down, and respawning mosquitoes that spit poison at you, but can be killed in one hit. Using your weapon two-handed will cover the elevation difference in most cases. Down in Blighttown, we move slowly through the water. I wanted to show how tedious this is before we solve this issue forever. This will be the last time I mention invaders, because they are pretty much always beaten the same way. The one this time is Mildred. We go back to the Firelink Shrine through a second entrance. On the way we get a room full of toxic blow dart men. They don't really matter after you get toxified. There's also a tree branch that will let you go over it, but never back. When you try to move back over it, it will always throw you down and kill you. This has never been fixed in years. I want to keep my rant about From Software's marketing for School of the First Sin, but in 2011 you could expect games being updated. But it feels like Dark Souls got dumped after its release and only got a port to make quick cash. Back in Firelink Shrine, we take the elevator to Andre, but jump off it to a pillar. We grab a key from the roof and pretend to be an egg for a pretty long time. Then we get transported back to the Undead Asylum, and the Hollows somehow got torches now. We activate the bonfire first, but if you are a new player, chances are high that you fall into the boss arena first, where there is a second Asylum demon. This trap is more tedious than unfair. If you die, you just need to travel back to the Asylum, which takes a lot of time, and you only have to battle the Hollows again. The Asylum Demon got a training montage and can do some weird AoE attack. If you stay behind it, you are safe. We can explore the Asylum again, now with Hookers and Black Knights, and the guy who gave us the Estus Flask. Most importantly, we get the Rusted Iron Ring, which allows us to move fast in water. There's also Snuggly the Crow that lets us trade soft or warm items. This usually means placing down an item. If there is a response like "that's not soft", then take it back and place the next one. If there is no response, the item can be traded. This is more like a secret and I don't like the execution. To finalize the trade you have to pass a loading screen. This can be done by dying or logging off. And both ways take too much time. Back in Blight Town we can now move fast in the water. On the way to Quelag we have new enemies that we just ignore. Because if you take a detour they will ignore you like two housewives hating each other. We see another atmospheric enemy. Those are not meant to be fought, but if you do, their tiny body and way too much damage in regards to how small they are can put up a challenge. It's hard hitting them and they can inflict you with eggs. What is eggs? A forced helmet healed with an egg vermintide. Down we go to Quelag. What I did not mention is that I don't use summons. I was very unsure about this because, as I already stated, I wanted to meet the game at its own terms and summoning is part of the game. I did decide against that for the reason that summoning makes bosses usually easier and you can't test them very well. Which is not a good combination if you want to analyze them. Summoning makes some bosses even harder in New Game Plus. That's some sort of new game where you can keep almost everything, but all enemies get stronger. Quelag is a spider weird boner hybrid that spits lava which semi-permanently alters the battlefield. She has a long range and she is way easier if you are aggressive and stay very close to her, which makes her attacks sometimes go over you. She will sometimes explode where you need to be outside the radius or block. Quelag is a fine boss that again teaches you a different behavior. If caution was the solution for the Taurus demon, then aggressiveness is the solution for Quelag. We move on, ringing the bell and finding a new bonfire behind a fake wall. You can also explore the region, which is way more fun with the ring. You will find two new enemies here, the boulder-wielding barbarians that you can fight just like their club-wielding cousins, and leeches that you just rush down. There's also a double fake wall to the Ash Lake, which I will not cover because you can beat every enemy that is in there elsewhere. So the only thing left for me to say is that it's a very nice area. With 2 bells rung, we now proceed to Sen's Fortress, which is both one of the best and worst areas in Dark Souls. Sen's Fortress has 2 major enemies, Snake Sword Fighters and Snake Magicians. I think they are supposed to be male and female. The Sword Fighters have a bit more health but can be circle strifed, parried or rushed. Circle strifing is very strong and fragile. Fragile because most enemies don't know what to do when you circle them. In cases where you have to fight 2 or more enemies, this might be the only fun way to fight them. Because luring them out and waiting till the attacks don't overlap takes too much time and feels even more like an exploit. I also consider that a fair tactic for fighting against stronger enemies. When I fought Havel, I had to backstab him more than 20 times, and executing that without taking damage yourself is a challenge on its own. Especially because Dark Souls is very inconsistent about backstabbing. Before I show you the Magicians, Meaty gets greeted by an old friend, the Stone Demon. 5 of them actually. They are down below the bridge and you can fight there, with the ring of course. On the way back we can reveal a fake wall, after which we fight a giant. Those giants have very strong rampaging phases and after this a very long weak phase. It feels like just surviving the attack and then doing damage yourself, not like a real fight. Now over the bridge we fight another Snake Man and above it the Snake Woman that you can fight just the same. You might already caught on what I consider the lowest part of Sen's Fortress. If not, wait for it. We go forward and see a giant stone boulder that rolls down into a hole. We run up and can proceed. There are a lot of traps in Sen's Fortress, many with pressure plates. We run after another boulder to one of the most memorable moments in Dark Souls. Mimics. Many people will remember the first time they encounter it, and I think they should have introduced mimics right after a bonfire to not overly punish players. But nonetheless, those mimics will be so engraved into your brain that in all Soulsborne entries you will attack every chest you encounter. This is maybe a sheep trap, because there are not enough indicators for players to notice. The only one I found, besides the chain on its right side, is that this chest is wrongly placed. Up till now every chest is aligned with the wall, but this one feels randomly placed in the room. But that is not enough to warn players. But I still like the mimic, because it gave me, and many others, a memorable moment in Dark Souls. It also gives me the question, is a short-term bad experience worth it if it turns into a long-term fun moment you can talk about with others? You can almost kill it before it wakes up, and besides its scrap attack, you can block or dodge most of it. Further on is an elevator that will kill you if you stand too long on it. This is the one I cannot understand. Dark Souls rewards you constantly for exploring. Not only that, but some secrets are hidden by elevators. It would be natural for players to assume, hey, there might be something up there. If I would do that, Meaty would turn into shish kebab. We can now run towards the top, where we find the mechanism for the boulders. We can change it to reveal some secrets, but we can also now go into the open and reveal another bonfire. We will get bombarded by a giant that throws giant bombs at us, and we later find a shortcut in form of these cages. We also meet a lone crossbowman and another demi-boss with Ricard's rapier, as well as our returning friend from the church. When we are up, we can first go fighting the bomb-throwing bastard. That turns out to be another rampaging giant, and then we fight the boss. The boss teaches us not to lock on. He will be so tall that if you lock on, you will not be able to see what he is doing. Instead, just walk at him, attack his knee until he wobbles very weirdly and falls down. Whenever he attacks, just dodge behind him. He's not hard, but can throw you off the arena. You can also fight the giant that puts the boulder into Sen's Fortress. Sen's Fortress's worst part is that it breaks suspension of disbelief. Up till now, you could pretend that every area was something useful before the cataclysm. A church or a town where people actually lived, but no one would build a fortress that way. Those traps would kill its inhabitants more than any attackers. It feels like a theme park for sad hollows that want to get a realistic Takeshi's Castle experience before they go fully insane. Atmosphere and tone is for me a huge part of Dark Souls, and Sen's Fortress breaks it. The best part is that those traps are still fun. It combines exploring, level design, and enemy placement. After the boss, you can access Anor Londo with the Albino Gargoyle Express. Anor Londo is a big city with big citizens. Literally, there are giant soldiers with shields that you can almost only fight by strafing behind their shield. All attacks can be blocked and dodged. I highly advise fighting against 2 or more. Further on this platform, there are 2 more knights and a mimic. The only path available to us is down the elevator, where you can fight one of the gargoyles again with an improved moveset. The gargoyle is easy, but I still got stuck here a lot when I played this game the first time. And I really mean stuck. Before Dark Souls came out on PC, it was available on Xbox. And I was lucky to get a copy from a friend who didn't like it and sold it to me for cheap. I did not have internet for the Xbox at that time, and I never found the right path myself. I had to look it up on the internet, because what the game wants you to do is walking on this narrow path to the church. If you are online, there's usually a sign that will guide you. Playing online really makes me think why From Software even has secrets. Before most fake vaults, you will find a sign, and many mimics are marked. They included online play, and that would mean that this is the intended way to play. But when they did, they should have noticed without doubt that players point out every secret, so why would they include it? A fake wall with 20 arrows before it that marks it as such is no longer an illusion. It could have been just as well an entrance. You won't find many signs on my footage because not many people play it today, especially because I don't play that remastered money-grabbing shithole that even remastered old already fixed bugs into it. On the church we find painting guardians that aren't really difficult to fight, but the area is making it more. I like the idea of having the area bringing the challenge, but it isn't well executed as it should be, because even your feet are hanging in the air. And it is not very clear how much space you have. You will then activate the spinning elevator thingy and fight another gargoyle. I already talked briefly about interconnected level design, and I want to expand on this in a potential Dark Souls 2 video. But what I want to note right now is that Dark Souls doesn't really do this. Many only remember Undead Burg, where this happens often and is done very well, but in most of Dark Souls 1, there is no real interconnectivity. At most there is one shortcut that is often just an elevator that doesn't feel really connected and more like a teleporter. This elevator is not a shortcut, but the only available way forward. And we will find another 2 giant knights and those albino gargoyles that have a lightning attack and are surprisingly agile. Being aggressive helps because they get staggered. Further down you will fight 2 together and most players will be stuck on the bridge before it and one of them will fall down. Then we go to the infamous Anor Londo Archer section. There are 2 archers, and while you move up, you can only dodge the arrows, because they are using a great bow and the hit can throw you off the tiny bridge. Then you move to the right and the second archer cannot attack you. You cannot really use parry, because it is really hard to see anything with the camera, and because of that you block the attacks so long that now the archer falls down and dies. This section fails for 2 reasons. First, you see these archers that are Silver Knights with bows the first time on this section. They behave similar to Black Knights that you don't need to fight. They are optional, and even if you did, how would you know that these knights work the same? You don't know how hard they hit or that you cannot block. Because you can't really see them very well, you will probably think their attacks are much different. Secondly, the platform they stand on is way too small. You can barely fight on it. If only one of these reasons would be done better, this could be one of my favorite combat formations. We find the bonfire shortly after this. These Silver Knights will be the main enemy of this section. There are some mimics and another demon, but nothing more. After opening a shortcut, we come to the main room. I don't know if this is a church, because every building in Anor Londo feels and looks like a church. You will find giant royal guards that behave almost the same as the normal ones, but they can heal themselves and use shockwave. We can go to the other side to open something that is not really a shortcut, because the time from the Anor Londo bonfire to this small gate would take longer than our current bonfire. There's a giant smith we can visit, and then we are ready to fight Ornstein and Smough. Ornstein is fast and Smough is slow, but a hard attacker. This is one of my most hated boss fights, because From Software did not figure out how to design 2 versus 1 boss fights yet. Because both enemies might attack at the same time, or their attacks and downtimes overlap. You usually have to play chicken till there's a window where you can strike. It sometimes takes minutes for you to land a few hits, or you have to risk getting hit. In this fight, the player's patience, or the lack of, is added to the challenge. Ornstein also has some poor attacks where he just glides to you like a swoop racer and hits you, even doing circles before that. Smough is way too big and you can sometimes not see what Ornstein is doing. After you defeat one of them, the other will absorb the powers of the defeated, and the fight becomes much easier and enjoyable. This is probably my fault, I'm just too impatient and attack whenever I should not. But for this fight of attrition I did not have enough Estus charges, so I decided to make a detour to Pinwheel. At this point you can go to the cemetery and kill the skeletons. Below are the catacombs with a very interesting mechanic. Skeletons in the area will not award souls, what new players will probably notice right away, because of the missing sound. Shortly after getting downed they reassemble. You have many options fighting them. You can push them off a cliff, which will kill them, or use a divine weapon. You can also kill the source of the revival, a fireball shooting necromancer that, like the toxic guys from Blighttown, will not respawn. The layout of this map is very good. The necromancer safeguards the only way forward in form of this lever. You will have to kill him. I really enjoy that. You get an interesting and strong mechanic and multiple ways to deal with it. I use the divine weapon, but rushing forward to kill the necromancer is also possible. If Undead Burg is interconnected upwards, then the catacombs are so downwards. There are multiple paths down, and if you know where to go, you can get to the boss very fast. Okay, but enemies. The first are skeletons that inflict bleeding, but you can deal with them like most humanoid enemies. The flying skulls are not really enemies, but new players will think they are. If you are near them, they very obviously charge up and shortly after that explode, dealing damage to other enemies as a result. Necromancers have a strong range attack, but Meaty will make minced meat out of them in closed combat. In almost any way, just attack. We find another secret bonfire and another platforming section, where I always forget what the game wants from me. You see a soul down this well and everything is black. Your options are rolling, running and jumping, but only one of them will get the item and the others will most likely kill you. It's rolling. There is a skeleton smith that is so metal that even his beard had bones while he was alive. Down here is also a black knight. That is a demi-boss, which means he makes the area stronger and doesn't respawn. In fact, when I came down, the Black Knight, together with the skeleton wheels, killed me. I literally fell right into them. Bringing them up, the skeleton wheels are really strong if you only use blocking. because they roll against you constantly and 2 of them will easily break through your shield. Go to a wall, dodge their attack, and wait for the roll to finish, then rush them down. After this comes Pinwheel, more of an atmospheric boss. Because he's very weak, you can ignore almost all of his attacks and just attack him. He spawns copies of himself that die in one hit. After this you can kindle up bonfires to a maximum, and that will increase their Estus charges to 20. After that I finished Ornstein and Smough and proceed to meet Guinevere. Big Boobs here gives us the Lord Vessel, which will let us teleport or warp, as well as placing it below the Firelink Shrine will open the path to the 4 souls. I decided to first go to Lost Izalith. After Quelak's domain we come to a large lava lake and find the boss right away, Ceaseless Discharge. I actually forgot to record this fight and I will show some other footage. You have 2 ways of fighting it. The direct way, dodging then attack his arms, or the puzzle way, luring it all the way to the back of the entrance and it will fall down. It's an atmospheric boss, not hard but solved with a puzzle. Lost Izalith is for many players the worst part in Dark Souls. Many miss the interconnected level design, which I find strange, because there were only one shortcut in Blighttown, Darkroot Garden, Sans Fortress and many more. It has practically the same amount of interconnectedness like the rest of the game, if you exclude Undead Burg, of course. The enemy placement, however, feels very poorly done. They only place them behind each other waiting for you, like you would place enemies in a custom map in Age of Empires. Most of them demons you have faced before as bosses. There are, however, 2 new ones. These statues that spit fire and you can stagger them, and worms that don't even feel like enemies. Hit them a bit, then retreat and repeat. The boss of this area is another version of the Asylum demon. Now it has increased mobility and range. At first I tried to circle it to be safe from its AoE blast, but he was constantly running away that in the end I just attacked him frontal and took the ship damage through the shield. After this we can get a shortcut that is just an elevator. I did not count this elevator because technically this is not Izalith but the Demon Ruins. Izalith comes now. We go further down and fight the Centipede Demon. You only have a tiny platform where you can stand, and when the Centipede Demon comes in range, he often jumps up, which has all the problems all jumping enemies have. He also has a grab attack and he will eat you if you get caught, but can you blame him? Look at Meaty, he's delicious. After he becomes the Sandy Dead Demon, he will drop a ring that lets you travel across the lava. The sound design though... Most games have rushed later halves, because statistically most players won't even play to this point. But after years of patches, this was never fixed. How? There's also the light quality that hurts your eyes. I think Lost Izalith was not meant to be explored. There are little rewards, the constant damage is uninviting, and the enemies look scary and give little benefit after defeat. There's also a lot of them. I think the idea was to fill this giant lava sea with tons of enemies, to tell the player keep out. But because of hardware limitations, the enemy count is just in between the number of horrible to explore and still beatable. If you don't explore and go right to the end, this section is not as bad as people make it to be. There's an NPC fight that has some very cheap fire moves. Best approach is to lure out one attack, then rush in for the win. Also these weird mushroom tentacle eye demons, they look more imposing than they are. Lure out one of their gas attacks, then attack them from any side. The shortcut is guarded by another demon, but never mind him. What's more important are these weird hairy creatures. If you reached rank 2 with the Chaos Covenant, you can open the shortcut and one of those enemies will drop the Sunlight Maggot helmet. It just makes light, but we will need that for later. The Bed of Chaos is not really a boss, but a badly executed puzzle. Your goal is to destroy 2 whatevers on the left and right. Then a hole will open and you can drop on a bridge, find the Bed of Chaos and kill it. First of all, this boss is not well designed. Her arms will often swipe you into a hole and you can't really see them. It's mostly luck. It fails as a puzzle and as a boss. And that is Lost Izalith. To summarize, we have weak and unbalanced enemies, an area that at best is not meant for exploration, and a poorly designed boss. Yes, Lost Izalith is the worst place in Dark Souls 1. Next is the Tomb of Giants, which is the reason we need our miner's helmet. It's dark and there are a lot of giant skeletons. They take a bit of time fighting with my current gear, so I just ignore them. They are not really fast. We also meet Patches, who became notorious within the series. He betrays you and you have to fight your way out. He can become a traitor if you don't kill him for his betrayal. Another strange enemy is the skeleton totem, which often blocks a narrow path. There are also giant skeletons that look more like hounds, but you can easily outrun them. Further down are tiny skeletons and necromancers that shoot fireballs at you, but are easy to kill. And then comes Nito. You enter the arena already damaged, and then there is a sword spike that strikes after a pitching scream. Problem is you cannot dodge it well. What I already suspected fighting Ornstein and Smo now becomes crystal clear to me. My +8 broadsword is not enough. It's really weak and has not enough range. So I decided to go first to New Londo and come back for Nito later. But before we can go to New Londo, we need to be able to traverse the abyss. So we move into that shitty looking forest again. The Darkwood Garden. Behind that door we opened way earlier, we have a lot of NPC fights. A cat that doesn't like me because I ignored it. In fact, after the cat you can easily travel to the boss called Sif. It's a giant wolf that wields a sword. Yes, a sword-wielding wolf, don't question it. He's really easy because you just need to stand under him and sometimes block. After this we get a ring to traverse the abyss. To make this complete, there are 3 more enemies in this part of the forest. Some strange cats that have the worst location to fight them. You can either fight all 3 of them, which is hard as hell because the overlapping attacks of 2 enemies now are free, well duh, or you try to go back into the woods, where the cats don't follow. There are also tiny and big mushrooms. The tiny ones randomly hit you, but most of the time flee, and the big mushroom hits very slowly. Probably the slowest attack in the game. Now off to New Londo. Under the Filing Shrine is an underwater city with a ghost. If you don't take the ghost hand thing, you cannot damage them or even block their attacks. Those items have a long duration and can be bought at the trader by the shortcut to the sewers. The most interesting part of them is that they ignore terrain and float through everything. You will find a mechanism that will open a door to the Valley of Drakes, which will reduce the water level. In the new region are dark waves that drop titanite. You need those to upgrade your weapons and armor. They also drop an item called Dark Hand. Together with a weird slime, those are the only enemies in the region. And although the level design isn't bad, the very small area and low enemy variety shows that this section was rushed. Like the other places, there's one shortcut in form of an elevator. This lack of care can be seen with the big slime I mentioned. It is a demi-boss, but isn't harder than the Dark Waves. The boss of New Londo are the 4 kings. You need to have the Abyss Ring equipped. I already know that Meaty has no chance with a +8 broadsword. But I try anyway, at least to show it. The 4 kings will spawn after some time, one after another. If you don't have enough DPS, you could fight all 4 together, which means almost certain death. After my defeat, I take the Titanite to a shop and promptly max out the Zweihander. Well, just look at the damage before and now. It's insane. And Meaty feels very powerful. Now let's fight the 4 kings again. Yeah, that feels better. Now we go to Nito and finish him as well. Now to the last lord, Zeef the Scaleless. On the way to him we find 2 armored boars. That cannot be air-scrapped. The enemy you will most often encounter is the Crystallized Hollow. They have a short jump attack and very little HP. There are also some casters in the area that you already know from the sewers and Undead Parish. When you fight your way up, you come to a crystallized room in which you find the boss that kills you without you doing anything to him. I heard about many people that challenged him a few times, but did not know that he's not beatable at this stage. The problem is that you can challenge him in that room again. They should have made it impossible to enter that room again, or place an NPC that explains Zeef's immortality. But if you give the game the benefit of the doubt that you missed something, and that you just need to see it and you challenge him again and again, then you will lose faith in the game. I did never had that problem, but I can perfectly understand how people would assume that. When he kills you, you will get transported to a different bonfire, and you have to escape the cell by killing a snake swordsman. His friends will activate the alarm, and those weird snake tentacle monsters come at you. They have some short-range attacks, but rushing them down two-handed is easy. You escape this library cell mix and come to a hall in which are casters that shoot at you while you explore. I have to say I like this section. First of all, the casters often shoot just a pillar, and if you keep moving, they almost never hit you. You can change the level layout with the central mechanism, which lets you kill these casters. I heard many complaining about these, but I never found them that hard or tedious, but an additional challenge to the exploration. This is also the change these four lords and their areas bring you. There is no change in combat, but a change in exploration. New Londo needs items, the tomb is dark, Izalith has constant damage, and the Duke Archives have casters that shoot at you while you explore. I find the other areas way more unfair, because you cannot evade the damage done to you, for example in the Lost Izalith. It's more unfair getting shot by a giant skeleton in the tomb than here, because you cannot be sure where the arrow comes from, and because of its knockback, it can kill you instantly by throwing you off. We can open a shortcut and go into the small forest outside the archives, which has ice elementals. Some of their attacks are enhanced and almost double the attack range. With my fully upgraded Zweihander, they are a joke. The Crystal Cave is the next area, and the gimmick here is that part of the floor is invisible. There are golems and moonlight butterflies, which you don't need to fight. You find your way down and see some clams that you can kill. They are easy and I like that they open when they die. And if they drop an item, it will look like a pearl inside of them. Then comes Seath the Scaleless. Seath is another boss with a gimmick. There's some weird thing in the end of the arena that you need to destroy. I'm sorry that I have to be so vague, but this blur effect is so strong in this area that it is easily the worst boss arena in all of the Soul series. I can feel my eyesight getting worse. Seath is an underwhelming boss if you're not an anime girl, just attack his tentacles. And sometimes leave the zone where he sprayed his crystal breath. That stuff is cursing you. So again you will have an easier time while being human. With Seath beaten we can now fight Gwyn, but before we do that we have some areas to finish. First is the painted world of Ariamis. It can only be entered if you have the doll from the Undead Asylum, and if you started it without having warp, you can actually be stuck here. It has 3 new enemies, Corvus demons that can jump on top of you, so you cannot block everything, bloated hollows that explode into a toxic mist, and the phalanx. The bloated hollows make me again think that Dark Souls was designed with an optional ranged weapon, because for pure melee fighters, they are hell. It's almost impossible to not get toxified. The phalanx is interesting because they are in fact many individuals that together form a shield wall. They are weak from the side and they break formations pretty easy. There's also an underground area with skeleton wheels that can be pretty hard. In the underground you need to use a lever that will open the way to the boss, and like most areas there is one sole shortcut to the start you can open. The underground has 2 entrances, but that sure doesn't count as a shortcut. On top of the bridge to the boss there is a zombie dragon that is actually easily beaten in melee. It's more of an atmospheric demi-boss. Hollows on the bridge sometimes hang outside and climb up when you are near them, but they are old enemies with old tactics. They have a tiny stat increase, but that doesn't amount to much. The same is true for the Armored Knight. And then we come to Priscilla. This boss makes herself invisible after you hit her. And if you come to the arena after attacking her, she will go invisible right from the start. My guess is that the devs didn't know how strong that gimmick will turn out to be, and that's why she didn't get strong stats. I killed her in a handful of hits. And then the painting is finished. Remember when I said From Software made everything killable? So what if you kill Guinevere, the boob? She is an illusion made by her brother and he will turn Anor Londo dark. There will be some new enemies and the Firekeeper will be hostile. You can now challenge Gwyndolin, that is a caster. He has infinite space and will teleport constantly. You can evade most attacks, but what I find questionable is that the first attack he throws at you are blocked by the pillars, but then the stronger attack just goes through the pillar. These inconsistent and badly communicated attacks should not be in Dark Souls. Either everything is blocked by the pillars or nothing is. You can also make it absolutely clear. For example, you could make all beam attacks go through every pillar and all projectiles get blocked. Anyways, you kill him and now to the last part. The last is the DLC, and I have to criticize it before we come to it. Let's say you make a game. You make it linear, so A happens, then B, then C, and finally D. Because of its linearity, you have full control about the balance. You know what weapons the player have, around which level they are, and this makes pacing easier. But now a DLC comes, which is F. F can be accessed right after B, and that is the problem. First, does this mean that the DLC has its stats based for the player that just finished part B? What happens to the rest of the game after you come back from the DLC with the shiny new weapons, souls and items? I like Artorias of the Abyss, but I don't like how it's implemented because if you go into it early, you break the balance for the rest of the game. And if you go into it last, like me, well, we will come to that. Speaking of things I don't like, it's goddamn convoluted. Below the tower where you fought the Tower Steam is a Hydra. You beat it by running to it, which will make it use melee attacks, allowing you to attack the heads. Which, by the way, is one of the parts in the game where I had to use a bow, because one of the heads is goddamn always way off, and I can never catch it. It's not even hard or dangerous, it's just bad design. Then you need to go back to a bonfire, or the Golden Golem won't spawn. Then you beat the Golden Golem, talk to the NPC, and then you go to the Duke Archives. Beat a Blue Golem, then go back, and then you can go into the DLC. You have to visit that place 3 times. Then we travel to the past. The DLC starts strong. We have the Manticore as a boss that has some good movement, many attacks, and even a poisonous one. And you cannot just block or just dodge, but most of the time a combination of both. But as I'm absolutely overleveled for this, he is easily killed. We come to a garden and the giant mushroom tells us to save the princess. And as some kind of Twisted Mario, we just do that. We have a large open area and see small enemies that actually keep the garden, and are probably the plant enemies in the future. There are also giant soldiers that later become the stone giants. They have some interesting tremor attacks. In the area we can see how the abyss swallows the world in form of these giant black holes. We can activate an elevator, and as I already said, this type of shortcut is very low on the atmosphere scale. Artorias, a knight in the service of Gwyn, was sent to solve the issue with the abyss. And he is consumed by the abyss, and we have to fight him. Even as a full wizard, I never wrecked him so much. I think wizard is probably overpowered in the early game, but this right now is no better. I remembered Artorias to be a badass, and he was really difficult, and this shows how much Dark Souls can be broken with superior stats. I also tried if you can parry him, and my guess is that it is not possible. This area has new enemies, some sort of beehive heads that rush at you, and casters that throw dark orbs. Dark orbs are a different kind of magic doing physical damage. This area is nice, you have some optional paths and some things to explore. What I liked the most was that the further down you go, the more the abyss swallowed the town and the enemies start blinking with their heads. Before we go fully into the abyss, we find another demi-boss that I killed so fast I did not even see what he does. The abyss is very dark, so much I take out my sunlight maggot helmet. The most interesting new enemy is the humanities. They are not strong, but lack physical and visual indicators, which is fitting. You saw them often as an item, and it's really cool to see that item now come to life to haunt you. You will also be led by Alva, the cat you could have met in the forest. She creates an illusion to guide you to Sif and to save him. After another elevator shortcut, we can now attack the boss of this area, Menace. Menace is compared to Artorias much harder. He attacks like a boss straight out of Bloodborne. He rampages and jumps around, but does not have the usual problems jumping beasts have. There's also a gimmick. When he summons black orbs, you can repel them with a medallion you find in the area before, which I didn't use. Neither did I use the summon. The last boss, Calamite, is optional and half puzzle, half proper boss. You need to go into the arena, get attacked by him in the air, and then ask the giant archer to take him down. Then you can fight him. He has good attacks and uses his iconic breath. He can also curse you. I find Calamite both a very easy boss and the hardest boss at the same time. How can that be? Well, you can cut off its tail, but that is really difficult. At least I found it very hard. Gladly I did not do that for this video. And with Menace defeated and the princess safe, and gladly not in another castle, Dark Mario has now another score to settle. And after that, off to Gwyn. The area is the kiln of the first flame, and there's little exploration, but tons of black knights. The only maybe harder section is when you're standing on a small connection. If you know how to parry, this is no problem. Funnily enough, that is also the solution for Quinn. Quinn has long range and a flaming sword, so you cannot block all of his damage, but he is vulnerable to parrying. And if you are able to parry, he's probably one of the easier boss fights. After this, you kindle the flame, and the game is over, and you can now enter New Game Plus. The following section is an analysis of the pacing in Dark Souls, and it also functions as a foundation for future videos. You could categorize gameplay in two ways: skill-based and stat-based. Skill-based means player skill. How much can you control the character, and do your blunders and your plays dictate the success of the play session? Stat-based is the opposite. It's about numbers. How strong is your character? How much defense does he has? Or how much damage can your character deal? If two characters clash, one kills the other in one hit and his opponent needs 10 hits, then many people would argue that this fight is stat-based. Which does not mean that the underdog has no chance, but the odds are in favor of the character with the higher stats. Many people think that Dark Souls is skill-based, that what you do with your character defines the outcome. This is a very shallow conclusion, as it only decides between what has the higher impact. A better approach is numbers, for example, saying that Dark Souls is 90% skill, 10% stats and 100% reason to remember its name. It is better but not accurate. For example, if you have superior stats in Dark Souls, enemies cannot do anything to you. The only thing you need to be capable of is facing the right direction and pressing the attack key. The enemies could theoretically kill you, but in reality it's unlikely. If you are underleveled, you will face the same issue with enemies. And maybe some of you might argue that they saw some streamers beating Dark Souls with a low level, but those people cheat in a way, because they put everything in offense. They don't have inferior stats all over, but only in defense. You need to be underleveled and under-equipped, which means no weapon at all. And as you can see, I still do like 4 damage to the enemy, but in reality I will not be able to beat him. I cannot edit my level, so I'm not really underleveled, but just the removal of all equipment can show you the flaw in the Dark Souls is skill-based argument. The problem lies not with the observation, but with the conclusion. Most people are right. Dark Souls is skill-based, if you play it the right way. Something that Dark Souls does better than almost every other game is pacing. You will most of the time only face enemies that are within your skill range, and that is why Dark Souls feels skill-based overall. To explain what I mean with skill range, we need to agree about another concept: power level. Power level is a number that indicates the power and the difference of one to another character. We also need to agree that the power level in this case only looks at character stats and equipment, and that higher power level means higher stats. Let's say when you start Dark Souls you are power level 1. If two characters with the same power level, for example 20, clash, the outcome is 99% skill based. If the stats favor someone, then this balance shifts. For example, power level 20 versus power level 24 is now 20% stats and 80% skills, and so on. That at one point, if you have power level 1 and the enemy has power level 60, it is 99% stats versus 1% skill. What Dark Souls does very well is that the difference in power level keeps the ratio low. Even if power level 10 and 20 fight against each other, there is still some skill involved. In other games, it would already be at 99% stat based, with that difference in stats. The skill range is the range in which skills are the primary factor. So for example, when you are level 20 and you have a skill range of 18, you can go to power level 2 or to power level 38 and you will still win with skills. But if you are outside the range, you have almost no chance anymore. This is not a perfect analysis, but better than the previous one. So to make a conclusion, Dark Souls has a skill range system with a wide range, and if you are outside that range, Dark Souls becomes stat based. And with this the video is finished, and I hope you liked it, and if you did, comment, subscribe or like. Farewell.